come to what is already our third digital editions launch, and it will be a bit of a methodological overview as well, how to approach historical books as objects and what questions you can ask. And it's a special pleasure to welcome back previous generations of history of the book students. So our first presenter, Alexandra Hertlein, did actually the history of the book option in 2019, together with Alyssa Steiner, who was also then here as a master student. Both have now gone on to doctoral work and integrate aspects of book history into their work and continue work that has started with a method option. So this is also a bit of an inspiration for the current generation of students. And then the Pfaffennarr will present it together with Agnes Hilger, whom you've already met last week with Arnold van Half and the crocodiles, and to show also the different aspects of what you can do when you're doing an internship at medieval German studies in Oxford. And then we'll have a kind of perspective at the end at work in progress of current history of the book students. So Sam Griffiths and Christian Tofte have been started working on Marginalia in Spanish Plutarch edition, and Emma will talk a little bit about the challenges of encoding Marginalia. And then I'll also present some more general views on Marginalia that were developed by one of the French students, Grace Cook, based on one of the Taylor editions. So without further ado, I hand over to Alexandra to talk about Jakob Locher's Panegyrici ad Maximilianum. And Alexandra, if you just tell me when to forward your slides.
Yes, I'll do that. Thank you. And thank you also very much for the opportunity to present my work on Jakob Locher's Panegyrici here. As Henrike said, I first started working on this publication 2 years ago for my method option. And in this context, I was looking at questions of genre and composition along the lines of what I called Maximilian I's media policy. So therefore, I paid particular attention to relations of text and image throughout the whole publication. And since then, I have started to work on an edition that is intended to feature a transcription of the text. It's written in Latin, as well as a translation and a commentary. But before I speak more about the edition, which is still in the very early stages, I would like to introduce the book to you as a representative example of early printing culture, and say something about some of the distinctive features of the two copies held at the Bodleian. So I was interested from the beginning in this particular text because it seemed to combine different aspects of Maximilian's so-called paper propaganda. It is a compilation of praise poetry, panegyric tragedy, letters to fellow humanists, and a collection of woodcuts. And I argue that even the woodcuts form a very concise narrative of Maximilian's success as an emperor. So as such, I think it mirrors the more general media policy of Maximilian, who not only installed poet laureates, poeta laureati at universities and at the court. Jakob Locher is such a poeta laureatus. He also commissioned panegyric tragedies, and he assigned the most famous artists of his time to perpetuate his achievements in monumental artworks such as Albrecht Dürer's triumphal procession. You might know this monumental triumphal procession, which was completed in 1515 to spread his glory throughout the empire. And I'd say that on a small scale, this publication, the Panegyrici, fulfills a similar purpose in that it makes the emperor virtually present, even in parts of the empire that were distant to the physical center of power. So Jakob Locher, just to say a couple of words about him, is best known for his Latin translation of Brand's Narrenschiff, but he also lectured poetry at Freiburg and Ingolstadt. He edited several Latin authors, for example, Horace, and wrote plays, 4 of which were performed during his lifetime. So what we see here, I've just included a brief overview of contents. This is more to give you an impression of what is contained in this publication. As I said, it's a compilation of many genres. I've just highlighted here the letters, and maybe we can just flip through quickly. The next slide highlights the praise poetry, and I think on another, but that's not as important, there is also some direct addresses to the reader, which makes it a very interactive setting. Yeah, there we go. So it's pretty much a dialogue that is meant to engage the reader and sort of drag the reader into this praise of the emperor. When the Panegyrici at Maximilianum were published in 1497, printing was still a rather novel invention, with the 1454 book fair in Frankfurt being the first one ever to see printed books. In fact, Piccolomini, who Silvio Piccolomini, who witnessed the disposition of the first Gutenberg Bible there, praised the aesthetic features, the readability of the new medium, and of course, the production was also many times faster and cheaper than that of manuscripts. But in the first place, it was the evenness and regularity of printed books that was most admired. So in the second half of the century, prices for books were constantly dropping as the paper production got more advanced. And even if books continued to be an object of prestige for quite some time, they were not limited to noble and clerical audiences anymore. But still, even in the light of lower prices and a broader circulation, I'd say that the number of surviving copies of the Panegyrici is astonishingly large. I looked it up on the Gesamtverzeichnis deutscher Wiegendrucke, and it lists 125 copies alone in public institutions. And when I saw that, I was wondering why did so many copies survive? And I thought that this could be due to the Panegyrici being a celebratory publication. So it served representational purposes from the beginning, has a very attractive book design, lots of woodcuts. In fact, I think it was 20 woodcuts. So it started out as a collectible from the very beginning. So I'm going to talk a bit about the printer, Johannes Grüninger. So the prints of this workshop bear only few typographical errors and have an overall very high paper quality. They were produced in Strasbourg at the workshop of Johannes Grüninger, who's very influential. He started operating in 1483. And even if the presses of Strasbourg generally were very famous for their high quality editions, Grüninger distinguished himself in that he operated more than 34 type alphabets, all of which were either Gothic or Latin, which you can see by looking at one page of the Panegyricus. I just included an image there. No, it's on the previous slide. It's the teichos, which is the Greek word teichos, and you can see here it is not typeset, but it's actually a woodcut. It's a bit irregular. So this is how we know that he didn't have a Greek alphabet. But he was also very famous for his rich decorations, and I'd say he's following a trend there that harks back to the tradition of block printing, where the narrative was formed exclusively by images. And in the Panegyrici, the images form a rather concise narrative that is fairly independent from the printed text, even if there are correspondences, of course, between the content of the text, the surrounding text, and the images. You can also just look at the images, especially in the tragedy, and you sort of get the plot structure. Yeah, and here we have two examples of woodcuts. They are colored here. They are not colored in the two editions in the Bodleian. We'll have a closer look later when handling the books. Just want to point out a special feature here. You see that one part is appearing in both on both pages, and that is on the left side the middle part, and on the right side the right part. And you can see here that he combined, like a toolbox, he combined woodcuts and rearranged them. And in fact, also the woodcuts in the Panegyrici, they sort of recycle woodcuts that were used in earlier editions of other texts. So nine of the woodcuts were used in an edition of Terence in the year before. 2 are from Narrenschiff, and 6 were carved exclusively for the Panegyrici. And what is quite interesting is that this middle woodcut you see here, which is Jakob Locher, was reused in Locher's own edition of Horace in the following year, depicting Horace. So I was wondering, as I thought there might be an overlap in the readership of these two publications. If the readers made the connection, the sort of antonomastic connection between the two, sort of installing Locher as the new Horace. So that is something to think about further, I think. Yeah, but now speaking about the two copies at the Bodleian libraries, they are, maybe we can go on to the next slide. They are characteristic incunabulous in that they still show a rather high rate of abbreviations. I just picked a rather random page here in terms of content. This is just one of the pages that seemed representative for the number of abbreviations in the texts. There are some pages that show a very high rate of abbreviations, some don't have any abbreviations at all. The thing is, they don't follow the necessity of sort of saving space, but I think they are rather imitating the handwriting in manuscripts in order to sort of elude their value and prestige, because in manuscripts there was a need to save parchment, so lots of abbreviations were included, which is not necessary in printed books. So this is still a characteristic of early printing, the amount of abbreviations. The two prints held at the Bodleian show only little variances. Here you see the shelf marks with some of the basic data. So one of the copies came to Oxford through Francis Douce, who was a British antiquarian who left his printed books, his manuscripts, and a collection of coins to the Bodleian libraries in 1834. But in fact, the earliest provenance of this book can be tracked to a man called Bolongaro Crevenna, who was an Italian-Dutch bibliophile and a collector who published a catalogue of his books, which is why we can track this copy down. And we'll have a look at the binding later. You will see that this book was a collectible through most likely through most of its life, whereas the other copy has a very different binding. It formerly belonged to the Tegernsee Abbey, which is a very famous library at the end of the 15th century, collecting large amounts of anti-Turkish propaganda, actually. And you can see, maybe we can go on to the next slide. Here I have included the frontispiece of the Tegernsee copy. You can see a note here that reads Tegernsee Monasterio Attenet Liber 1499. I don't know exactly if this date refers to the acquisition or to the cataloguing. Maybe someone could help me there, but at least it was acquired by the monastery rather shortly after the publication. Yeah, so just to say a bit more about the distinctions between the two prints. The Douce print, as I said, was owned by collectors and survived as a representational object, whereas the Tegernsee copy seemed to have been studied quite heavily because you can see on, I think, 2 pages, you can see the traces of repairs with paper patches. And quite tellingly, one is at the beginning of Locher's Dialogus de Heresiarchis, which could have been of interest because of the religious context. But the paper quality appears to be equally high in both prints. You can see I've included an example of a watermark here. Unfortunately, I didn't have a picture of my phone. Didn't manage to take a picture through the page to.
We can ask Andrew perhaps to show that later. Yeah,
that would be great. Yeah. So, but my point was that most of the paper comes from a local paper mill in Strasbourg, which is the one you can see here. And now going back to the frontispiece of the of the Tegernsee copy, we not only have the Tegernsee Monasterio Athenet inscription, but we also have a lily pad referring to the abbey's characteristic emblem, and we have some decorations in red ink here, and in fact also, and that is quite remarkable, a pagination that seems to have been added in 1499 as well, because it seems to be the same ink. And that is remarkable because it's one of the first examples of pagination ever. I only know of paginations dating from the 16th century, but if that is in fact has been paginated in 1499, that would make it one of the first examples of pagination. You'll see it when we flip through pages later, that there is a continuous pagination. So it's not entirely clear how the book came into the possession of the Tegernsee Abbey, but it might have been acquired because of the library's focus on anti-Turkish propaganda, to which Locher's publication, of course, added in that it displays Maximilian as the Christian emperor fighting the Muslims. It also in several pages he's described as religious, as pious and justus, could you maybe go back to the coat of arms, we were just showing, because I've talked a bit about the variances in the two copies. There are a couple of typographical errors, like a misspelling of the word Christo, but the Tegernsee copy, which is the one I was just speaking about, seems to be the later one, the corrected one, which is corrected throughout the process of printing. Very interestingly, it also features a coat of arms that is missing in the other copy. Maybe we can now even have a look at the book's life. Maybe you can just bear in mind the left image, which is an image from the Wernigeroder Wappenbuch. I tried to trace the iconography of the two coats of arms and found a contemporary Wappenbuch. Maybe we could have a look at the two pages now in the two copies.
All right, so this is the
Tegernsee copy. Yeah, you see, it's a paper binding, whereas the other one is a contemporary calf binding. I mean, contemporary as in from the 18th century, which was probably commissioned by Douce, who first acquired it. No, the Douce, who was the last owner before it came to the Bodleian. And if you could go now to the page with the coat of arms. So I'm going to talk a bit about what this woodcut shows and why it is interesting to have it here in this publication. Because what we see here is we see two coats of arms, with one showing anterior Austria and the other one showing lower Austria, which in fact Maximilian reunified and reincorporated into the Habsburg hereditary lands. So including this coats of arms in the publication is a sort of visual stress and some of Maximilian's military success. He regained anterior Austria, was handed to him by Sigmund of Tyrol in 1490. I showed you the Wernigerode Wappenbuch before. You see the one with the eagles, but you also see the so-called Bindenschild, which is here on the left, with a silver stripe on red ground and a peacock's trail decorating the crest. And this Bindenschild used to be the coat of arms of the House of Babenberg and was later adopted by the Habsburg dynasty. Since the rule of Maximilian's father, Friedrich III, both coats of arms appeared in every national heraldic symbol, yet they were usually incorporated into other heraldic ensembles or only reproduced in part. So it's rather rare to have them at such an early stage in a combination. It's quite unusual in 1496. Yes, so there is a connection to his father that is made on a visual level here, because Maximilian, by reunifying the Habsburg hereditary lands, he was fulfilling a goal that was set by his father, Friedrich III. And also in the text in the Laudes, where the emperor is prized for several virtues, there is a connection with his father, because first his father is praised, and it's slowly transitions into a praise of Maximilian, who is sort of the fulfillment of the virtues his father set as a goal. I don't want to speak too much about this coat of arms, even if it's very interesting to speculate about why it is missing in one of the copies. It could have been that it was just an accident, or the woodcut hadn't been finished at the time. But maybe we can have a look at some of the other woodcuts in the copy as well. Maybe the ones I have shown in my presentation earlier, just because the images I have shown in my presentation, they are not there from a digitized version of a copy that is held in Freiburg. But maybe we can have a look at, what was it, 12 recto, at the two woodcuts and just see how they are combined. Oh yeah, there we have a lovely image of Pfaffennarr, which you probably see. I saw it in the presentation that you're going to see afterwards. So here we have an example of the practice of eruditio. You see some comparative reading here, and maybe we could now
actually just hold on for a moment on that image, because this provides us also for a model for the book fool in the Ship of Fools, which is then inverted in the Pfaffennarr that we see later. So you here see the serious model for what then is turned into a foolish endeavor.
Yeah, it must have been a very a prototype, so a very typical image, which is then with the glasses and sort of the you see a satirized version of that later. Yeah. Maybe we can go on to just have a brief look at the woodcuts I've already shown in the presentation. Yes, so here you can see see a line between the tree and the poet, which is just because they were individual woodcuts that were rearranged, and sort of by its context, they became a different meaning depending on what was surrounding the individual woodcuts. Yeah, I don't know if we want to look at another page. We could just, I mean, we could look at every woodcut. They're very pretty. But maybe I'm also going to tell you a bit. Yeah, there we have the laudes, which is part of the praise of the emperor. We also have an image of a triumphal procession, which is, oh yeah, this is part of the, yeah, can we, oh yeah.
That's
Oh, you also, by the way, you see the red pagination on the top right corner here. That is what I've been talking about earlier. And we have also on page 34, recto, we have a piece of music scores. I haven't figured out what we can see on there. Maybe someone can help me with that. I'm not an expert with scores from the 15th century. Yeah, there we go, in the chorus Sapphicus. I don't know if it's actually if it is a recognizable score. We might have to zoom in a digitized version. Yeah, that is something I will have to comment on or look further into for the commentary. And yes, speaking of the edition, I'm planning to provide a transcription which is mostly completed, and a translation as well, because only the tragedy has been translated so far. But I think it would be very good to sort of provide a translation of the whole work, because it's an interesting publication in this state of being a compilation of different genres. So my idea is to translate the whole publication and then provide two commentaries, one dealing with the linguistic and philological issues, tracing the similia, and maybe linguistic peculiarities, and the other one will be concerned with the material aspects, which is what I've been speaking about today. I have used, for the transcription, I've used Transcribus, which was, I'd say, about 80% correct. There were lots of abbreviations I had to add manually, but yeah, so that's where I'm at with the edition at the moment. I'm not quite familiar with the infrastructure yet of the. I have to align it with the Taylor edition infrastructure, but yeah, this is where I'm at the moment, and I'm very thankful about advice and commentaries, and thanks again for letting me speak here.
It's wonderful, and we'll have then another launch once you have finished it, and then we might perhaps be able to sing the chorus Sapphicus, because it certainly is a Sapphic meter. So, qui fidem Christi salvem formitis, lege prescripta reverente omnis, et frequentatis superum penatis, fides salubris. So it would work with a Sapphic hymn meter.
Oh, that's amazing. Maybe we can even add an audio
yeah.
audio file to the edition.
Many thanks. I'll take over again with a next project. And Alexandra actually started her project at a quincentenary, namely the quincentenary of the death of Emperor Maximilian, which was in 1519. So we started our projects in 2019 based around Maximilian. And we're coming now to another a double quincentenary, because the Pfaffennarr was published exactly 500 years ago in 1521. And that's also the year in which Sebastian Brandt died, the author of the Narrenschiff. And we have already heard several times the Narrenschiff mentioned both as a source for woodcuts and as a the work that was translated by Jakob Locher. But I hand over now to Agnes to tell us how we are running the Pfaffennarr section of this launch.
Yeah, thank you, Henrike. I hope you can all hear me.
Yep.
So the idea behind this project we're going to present today was, as in so many cases, Henrike's. Since Alyssa Steiner did a lot of work on the Narrenschiff, and since I worked on the Würzburg Narragonian Digital edition, and since we were both in Oxford in Hilary term, Henrike suggested that the two of us could do a small joint project and create a digital edition of the Oxford copy of the so-called Pfaffennarr. And first Henrike will talk about the connection of this Reformation pamphlet to the Narrenschiff and especially to its woodcuts. Then I'm going to say a few words about the edition itself. And then Alyssa will talk about the text, and we will have a look at the pamphlet with Emma and Andrew, I think, in the end. So I hand over to Henrike now.
Yeah, so this launch comes at the end of a week of commemoration of Sebastian Brandt. Last Wednesday, Alyssa was giving a lecture in Basel, or as we now have it, in Basel from Oxford, about concepts of gender and the European transmission of the Narrenschiff. And then we put it into practice on Monday with launching a whole fleet of Narrenschiffe. You can watch the event on the History of the Book blog under Sebastian Brandt's Ship of Fools, where we had copies from the Staatsbibliothek Bamberg, from the Bodleian Library, and also from the British Library, looking at the shape-shifting of the text through languages, but also of the book layout and of the woodcuts. And we took as one example for that the first chapter, which is headed von unnützen Büchern, so about books that aren't used or not used properly, because you see the book fool just using the fly squatter to chase away flies from the books rather than taking its content to heart and learning from it. And we spent also the morning of Monday typesetting a commemorative card with a book fool. And it's good that you just saw Jakob Locher's praise of the Poeta Laureatus, because that is actually the model for the book fool, which is then ridiculed. And the book fool undergoes several transformations in the different editions. So these are now screenshots from the new digital presentation of the Ship of Fools Narragonian Digital, where you can have side by side on the screen different versions of the Ship of Fools and different editions and different languages. So on the left-hand side, you see the first edition with the book fool. On the right-hand side, you see an inverse copy of the book fool, which is the product of cheap copying, whereby you don't bother to reverse the copying process, but copy it directly from the printed page, which then results in the bookful looking from the right to the left instead of from left to right. So that's from the Strasbourg edition from the later the same year or early 1495. You see as an addition the little dog, which then becomes a staple diet of the bookful, and I think is a bit of a comic take on St. Jerome's lion, which sometimes really looked like a dog at the feet of Jerome, or also the lion of the evangelist Mark, because that's again the same iconographic tradition. And you see also the scholar's cap is slightly more squashed. So what you see on the left-hand side is an independent also take on the first edition in the Nürnberger Narrenschrift. But what you see on the right-hand side is, I think, a mirroring of the mirroring. So the bookful is looking again from left to right. And that's, I guess, because it's copied from the Strasbourg tradition woodcut. So it's double inverted, and you see the dog lying to the feet and the slightly squashed cap. And then we come to the pamphlet from 1521, which is also taken from a later edition of the Ship of Fools, which apparently is an inversion of the inversion of the inversion. So again, the bookful is looking from the right to the left, has the doggy at the feet, and a rather stylized fly squatter, which looks more like a palm leaf. And so you see really this network of printing running around Europe and running around different genres. The four can be taken to signify quite different elements of foolishness. I'll talk a bit more about why it was attractive for the pro-Reformation side to use something that was actually a quite conservative project, not aligned to the Reformation, but became attractive for the Lutherans to adjust it to their purpose. Before we go into this Reformation context, Agnes is going to talk briefly about the edition itself and the elements that we have in there.
Yeah, thank you. So just a few words about the edition. Thanks to Emma Huber, the edition is available as a Taylor edition now. So I think Henrike or Alyssa, if you could post the link to the chat,
it's
everyone
in
can have a look.
On the
okay. Yeah. It's okay, perfect. So yeah, I think as probably most of the Taylor editions, we have a facsimile, a diplomatic transcription, and also a normalized version of the text, which can be found under translation. For the transcription, we took the editorial guidelines of the Narragonian Digital edition as a sort of model. So that means that our transcription is quite diplomatic. For example, we differentiated between different forms of letters like the S, or for example, we transcribed the geschwänztes Z. I don't know if there is a word for that in English. I don't think so. And we also transcribed diacritics and all these things. But yeah, as I just mentioned, we also have the normalized version of the text. First of all, that means that we added interpunction, but also that we normalize the diacritics and the different forms of letters and so on. We will also normalize the capitalization in the next few days, and also we will add some comments. And later, Alyssa will add a translation into English as well, which is almost done right now, I think. So I'm looking forward to that as well. Since we don't have marginalia or special abbreviations or other things like that in the pamphlet, we actually didn't face any special challenges or something in the encoding process yet. Maybe there will be something later. So I don't want to bore you now with the edition, and I give the floor to Alyssa, who will talk a little more about the text itself.
I think at this moment, Emma, if you want to share the Taylorian copy.
Great. I think while Emma's setting up, I can add some bits of information. So this edition that we've edited is the third edition of the Pfaffennarr. So there's all three editions that we have today were published in 1521. So we have a first edition in Augsburg, which has a very different title page to the one we see here, which is not based on the book 4. Then we get a second edition in Strasbourg, which actually takes the woodcut we can find in the Ship of Fools and the German Ship of Fools. And then the third edition, which is the one we have in front of us right now, the second Augsburg, also includes a woodcut based on the Ship of Fools, but it's Henrike already showed it's slightly different woodcut that has been transformed throughout the many steps of transmission. The text is an appeal to the nobility, as opposed to clerics, mainly based on the main criticism of hereditary law. So the idea that through the clerical class, money enters the church, but then doesn't leave it again. So this is an appeal to the nobility to please keep and not relinquish them to the Pope. I've selected one little passage that I'll quickly read out, just so you get an impression of the text. Maybe Emma, you can leaf through to folio to recto. Exactly. So it's the 7th line, if anyone wants to read along. Yes. Let me pull this up. Aber ich glaube, wenn man die Pfaffen und Jäger aus dem Land jaget und behielten unser Pfrind und unser Geld, es wär viel besser. Man henket sie an die Baum, wann sie beraubend alle Land und nehmen, was darin ist. Hat man nicht Geld, so nehmen sie Käse. Haben sie nicht Käse, so nehmen sie Flachs. Haben sie nicht Flachs, so nehmen sie Eier. Haben sie nicht Eier, so nehmen sie Korn. Wann ihr heilig frisst alles, und hätt also sehr gefressen, weil ihn der Bildschnitzer geschnitten hat und gemartert und der Maler beschissen, so hätte ihnen die Spähen gar gefressen, die man von ihm gehauen hat, bis ein Marterer geworden ist und in der Maler hübsch gemacht hat. This is certainly one of the more entertaining passages of explaining how clerics should be out from the country because of their great greed. Basically saying that if you don't have money, they'll take your let me try to pull this back up. If you don't have money, then they'll take your cheese. If you don't have cheese, they'll take your flax. If you don't have flax, they'll take your eggs, and so on. Yeah, really summarizing of the clerical class. Yeah, so this is it from me. I think Henrike is going to talk a bit more about how this fits into the Taylorian collection more broadly.
Thank you. So this is one of the very shortest pamphlets that we have in the Taylorian. So it would have just been one printed sheet folded twice to form this quarto booklet. And it's in a modern binding. Emma, if you could just go back with a, and you can see on the spine, it's captioned in a 19th century hand. And that is typical, this binding and the captioning for the pamphlets that were bought secondhand from Germany under the directorship of Max Friedrich Müller, one of the earliest professors of German, who wanted to teach German history and literature from originals. So he bought a number of, if you go back to the Taylorian stamp, so that's the ex libris of the Taylorian in the 19th century, and you see it has moved place a number of times. And Max Friedrich Müller was particularly interested also in historical linguistics and the development of German, and bought a lot of Reformation pamphlets from Heidelberg University Library, who at that point were cutting up their old Sammelbände, which had been formed in the 16th century, because otherwise a small pamphlet like that wouldn't have stood a chance of survival if it had been there on its own. And perhaps, Andrew, if you want to share the Bodleian copy in comparison, then we can see that when actually in the 19th century, out of veneration for Luther, new composite volumes were built up, which served as a kind of monument to the Reformation by compiling many of these short pamphlets into impressive volumes again. Yeah, so this is one of the collective volumes of Lutheran treatises, yeah, Autographa Reformatorum. So these are nearly 100 copies of short pamphlets bound together, or actually, so it's 20 of these, but it's the 16th volume of these compiled things that were made up by booksellers in the 19th century and bought by the Bodleian as already a compilation. You can see from the forage that Andrew is just showing, these came from very different presses, and each press would have their own format. So there isn't a standardized A4, A3, A5 sheet, but Augsburg would have a different paper size from Strasbourg. And fortunately, they didn't cut it down in this volume to fit the binding, but left the different sized short pamphlets in their original width and length. If you want to leaf through a few of these until we come to the Pfaffennarr, so these are all from 1521, so exactly 500 years ago, and show what a prolific output the Reformation had. And for about a decade, all the German printing houses didn't publish anything but theological treatises. There was such a war of words between the Lutheran and the Catholic side, and it had become quite heated by 1521, as you could hear from the bit that Alyssa was reading. And we'll have later in the term, beginning of June, another Reformation pamphlet launch that is exactly 500 years old. That's the Passional Christi und Antichristi, which will be presented by Edmund Wareham. And that is taking the anti-papal polemic to another level, where the Pope is equaled with the Antichrist. And there the woodcut aesthetics is used to create these stark contrasts. Compared with that, it's more a gentle humor, even here in the Pfaffennarr, but it also uses the didactic potential of the black and white medium to present the foolishness of the Catholic position in this case. So this is, Alyssa had talked about the 3 different editions. It's from the same 3rd edition, which has this inverted book 4 image. All right. So from the Reformation publications, we now jump back into the incunable period and look at something else that was acquired by the Taylorian more or less at the same time as the Reformation pamphlets. It's a copy of the Plutarch's Life of Famous Men, translated into Spanish, and it has been the object of a really ambitious history of the book project, co-edited by 2 of the Hispanists, Christian Tofte and Sam Griffiths. And you can see from the amount of blue hyperlinks on the page I'm showing you here, that they have undertaken not just to transcribe the text, but also link it up with paratexts, both paratexts within the copy. So you have in the gray box Egeo, the transcription of the Marginalia at the left-hand side, and you could click through and then you would come to the Wikipedia entry for Aegeus, the king that who is discussed at that point. And Emma is going to talk briefly now about the transcription challenges that the students faced with looking at Marginalia, at parallel copies, and then we have the chance to look at the Taylor copy and at the Bodleian copy.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, it works well. Thank you.
Excellent. So yes, I just wanted to draw attention to some of the features of this digital edition, because it has been quite ambitious in what it's trying to achieve. You can use TEI encoding to do quite a range of things. So this one looks at 3 different witnesses for the same text. which we've got a little drop-down list here. So the first one is the Taylor institution copy that we have here, which has all the, as I say, external links, as well as having done the abbreviations and expansions where they occur, and lots of textual features as well. As well as that, though, we've got two other copies. So one from Lisbon. Now, we unfortunately don't have the facsimile images available, but the transcription has nevertheless, if I scroll through very quickly, got some of the annotations that are present in that edition. And if I move to the Madrid copy, you see there's many, many more annotations. So managing to move in one single encoded document between 3 different witnesses and encode those at this level of detail is quite a challenge in itself. So the notes here are showing the point in the text. So this point here, when I hover over it, it says the text has nin, and then the annotation, handwritten annotation in the book is ni. So we need to go through, and we need to go and add the next level of encoding for TEI, which is to mark what's been deleted and then what's been added, and maybe even the hand that's done it. But so it's a work in progress, but already it's managed to get the complexity of those 3 different witnesses of the same text with all the handwritten annotations that go with it. And also, while I'm on the digital edition, you'll see there's a link to 2 blog posts further about it in the About section. So I think that's what I wanted to say about the edition, but do you want me to show the actual copy as well?
Yes, please.
I shall move to sharing that then. Sorry about before, my phone decided it needed to do an update, and which is why it suddenly cut out.
While Emma is setting up, I'll just briefly introduce the Bodleian copy, which Andrew will be showing afterwards, which is there. It is wonderful. Thank you.
Yes. So this is the Oxford copy, the Taylorian copy in the original form. So we have this space for the initial illuminated letter, and the marginalia. Unfortunately, there's only a few marginalia in this text, and they're right in the gutter of the text. The egeo is just here, can just about make it out, and there's another annotation on the other side. The binding's a little bit tight for me to easily be able to show you that. There's the other annotation there. Go through. So this is bound. This is a 2-volume work. It's a large work.
Yeah, quite another league from the Pfaffennarr.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is just volume 1 of 2 of the Plutarch.
Thank you. We'll look now at the Bodleian copy, which is also bound in 2 volumes. And yeah, you see the same layout with the little guard letters, which then, if you were ambitious, could have filled in by a book illuminator in good. Emma, could you? Yeah, perfect. It's fine. And then this was actually bought again at the same time as the Taylorian was buying books. So this comes from the Real Biblioteca Publica in Madrid. which, and it still has the monogram RPB somewhere. So, and it has a parchment binding with a Plutarch on the spine. So I guess it was bought also as a duplicate from Madrid when they were getting rid of duplicates. And fortunately for us, the libraries in the 19th century were quite keen on getting rid of the grubby ones, which are now the much more interesting ones because they show how books have been used and interacted with. So we like the doodling in the margin, and that's something that the students have been trying to capture, these uses, traces of use. Could you perhaps go to, let's see, well, there should be A2 and 3, there should be, yeah, we're already there, the Marginalia. Could you go to double L1 verso, please? So while the Pfaffennarr had just one quire A, this has quires that go up to double letters. So once you're through with the alphabet for quires from A to Z, you start again with double A, and then here double A1 verso is reported to have, no, I can't see it. Oh yeah, there it is in the gutter again, hidden. So there is still quite a bit to do, but I think the area of encoding marginalia is certainly something that is very promising if we want to get an insight into what fascinated earlier readers about their books. So I'll end with just pointing out one further project that had actually originated in the very first session that we had with the history of the book students. So Emma and I always start the students off with a show and tell session where every student gets one book on their desk. So this worked even with social distancing rules in order in Michaelmas. And I've just I sometimes also call it with an expression that Dan Wakelin used, the stroke a book session, because it's the fascination with the materiality. And Grace Cook, who looked at the Roman de la Rose early print from 1573 from Paris, was fascinated by early reader interventions, which start at the micro level just of what Alexandra actually talked about earlier, pagination. And you see the typical phenomenon of the reader who gets weary. So between 53 and 55, the hand changes from an early user who uses ink for pagination to a much later user using pencil and treating the book in a different way, not reading through it, but rather cataloging it. So this will result in a blog post talking, Grace is interviewing currently librarians about their attitude towards marginalia and whether they appreciate modern day users interacting with the books. So watch this space. and come back next week for a really exciting a double new venture. We had neither Tupi nor Welsh until now in the Taylor editions. So that will be Mary Newman and Lois Williams talking about two firsts, the probably the oldest Tupi manuscript and the oldest book printed in Wales.